66 torturous days have passed and a massive genetic revelation just hit that might completely blow the lid off Nancy Guthrie's vanishing. Yet federal authorities remain entirely powerless to intervene. Why are their hands tied, and might this chilling trail point straight toward Sheriff Nanos? We urgently need to pay attention to one specific expert today. This investigator cracked 300 mysteries, and her newest public statement might literally expose whoever snatched Nancy Guthrie. Prior to diving deep into this explosive update, let us examine the initial genetic clues found at the scene and understand why this recent shift carries enormous weight. Initial leads went cold rapidly. Hand coverings discovered 2 miles from the residence merely looked like the ones our suspect possessed. Swabs taken off that fabric entered CODIS, the massive federal registry containing over 22 million offender records, yet yielded absolutely 0 hits. Absolutely. Checking the fabric traces against genetic material pulled directly from the residence proved equally useless, as both biological swabbings failed to align. Failed to align. That highly publicized clue eventually just pointed straight toward a nearby food service worker who had absolutely nothing to do with the actual crime. The truly significant breakthrough arrived via an official announcement from Pima County law enforcement during that exact same period. Officials explicitly stated they gathered biological evidence from the house belonging to neither the victim nor her inner circle, and detectives immediately began hunting for its mysterious owner. Detectives hid the exact discovery spot. They also refused to reveal the physical nature of this hidden material. They only verified sending everything out for thorough scientific testing, while admitting the resulting profile triggered absolutely zero hits within CODIS. Shortly afterward, the sheriff announced detectives were pursuing advanced ancestry tracing techniques for those swabs, a method functioning perfectly without any previous criminal convictions. Detectives merely need any distant family member of our perpetrator to have voluntarily submitted their own spit tube to a commercial heritage website previously. Suddenly, a massive paradigm shift occurred when the sheriff told network reporters that the biological evidence pulled from the victim's house wasn't a pristine, isolated profile. Multiple individuals contaminated that single swab, causing severe scientific headaches that might delay answers for up to an entire year, while technicians struggle to separate the strands. Hoping the facility succeeds means realizing these experts, analyzing our crucial evidence, keep producing complex data only to smash headfirst into an identical brick wall constantly. Current technological algorithms completely fail at untangling this incredibly messy jumble of intertwined biological identities. Each processing run yields highly questionable data, making it far too risky for commercial heritage sites where one tainted upload might completely derail the entire manhunt indefinitely. These experts aren't failing, they remain incredibly meticulous. They absolutely refuse to deliver any evidence incapable of surviving brutal courtroom cross-examination. Until they untangle these strands perfectly, the crucial swab simply sits dormant, waiting for far more than a typical bureaucratic backlog to clear out. It awaits new scientific breakthroughs. Combined biological materials aren't automatically hopeless cases, since testing facilities successfully analyze similar tangled genetics every single day. If a single person's cellular trace massively overpowers the others, or if very few distinct individuals touch the item untangling, everything remains tough, yet completely possible for trained experts. Under such circumstances, blended fluids represent a minor hurdle rather than an impenetrable barricade. However, the sheriff's daunting 12-month estimate hints at an analytical nightmare far surpassing typical laboratory headaches. Analysts call this a complicated biological soup, meaning several people left behind roughly equal cellular traces. 0 individual traits stand out with every genetic blueprint aggressively overlapping the rest. Having multiple equal donors makes pulling one clean identity out nearly impossible, especially when handling microscopic skin cells left strictly through casual physical contact with everyday surfaces. We mean microscopic residue transferred by uninjured bare hands, ensuring the starting pool of biological material is already agonizingly tiny from the very beginning. Untangling a microscopic, overlapping cellular mess left by several unidentified individuals remains arguably the single most brutal hurdle currently existing within modern criminal analytics. Right now, absolutely 0 testing facilities across the entire globe possess the necessary tools to isolate the exact biological signature this specific manhunt desperately needs to move forward. This reality slams us right into the central hurdle, as modern crime solvers actually utilize 2 completely distinct methods for analyzing human genetic blueprints. The massive technological divide between these 2 approaches perfectly explains why our crucial crime scene swab has languished in complete silence for 66 agonizing days. Method 1 involves short tandem repeat testing the exact scientific engine powering CODIS that has served as the absolute foundation of biological criminal tracking since the 1990s. This older technique counts precisely how often a tiny genetic snippet loops at predetermined spots along your chromosomes, since these looping patterns vary between individuals through predictable, inherited traits. This well-established method uses probability software, allowing technicians to effectively separate heavily mixed, traditional genetic clues. These computer programs calculate every conceivable mix of human identities within a droplet, assigning deep mathematical probabilities to each outcome, and they've survived 30 years of brutal legal refinement. Judges consistently embrace this system while ruthless defense lawyers constantly fail to debunk it because the underlying biology withstands every single judicial strike beautifully. Untangling those traditional swab blends is practically ancient history for investigators. However, the second method relies entirely upon tracking single nucleotide polymorphisms instead. Advanced ancestry tracking completely depends on this much newer technique, which functions across a staggeringly vast, unimaginably complex biological scale. These newer blueprints completely ignore counting simple genetic loops isolated at static chromosomal checkpoints. Instead, they scan microscopic cellular mutations across hundreds of thousands of distinct locations scattered throughout the entire human body, treating every single tiny shift as a critical piece of evidence. Combining these countless microscopic markers paints a stunningly vivid family tree, linking suspects directly to their distant blood relatives spanning multiple generations via shared cellular quirks. Mailing your spit to 23andMe to discover random foreign heritage alongside a massive list of unknown third cousins is literally just viewing the direct results of this exact advanced biological scan. Detectives upload this incredibly complex map rather than the outdated loop counts into public heritage registries to systematically hunt down fugitives by working backward through their extended family branches. This advanced tracking revolutionized modern policing back in 2018, 8 years ago, famously unmasking the elusive Golden State Killer following 40 long years of outsmarting California detectives. Cops didn't trap the monster using prior criminal records. They nailed him purely because his distant cousin voluntarily submitted a simple saliva kit to an online public ancestry forum. Picture a genetic detective piecing together a fractured genetic code from a crime scene to a distant cousin painstakingly mapping 4 decades of ancestry data until D'Angelo finally surfaced. Going from a raw file upload to a locked-in suspect didn't take lifetimes, it took mere weeks, and that lightning-fast turnaround absolutely floored everyone watching. Investigators working this current case are desperately hoping for that exact same velocity, yet 8 solid years of technological upgrades haven't cracked one massive hurdle. Untangling a heavily jumbled single nucleotide polymorphism sample is an absolute nightmare, and it goes way beyond the basic challenges researchers used to face with standard short tandem repeats. We are talking about an entirely different universe of mathematical power, considering traditional profiles only look at around 20 specific markers across your entire genetic code. Meanwhile, modern profiling requires scanning hundreds of thousands of microscopic points across your complete biological blueprint. Picture a sample where multiple people's microscopic genetic signatures perfectly blend in roughly equal amounts. Trying to digitally isolate one target's massive string of genetic data from that chaotic background interference requires a level of math that blows old-school analysis out of the water. Suddenly, the algorithm faces an overwhelming avalanche of potential answers, bringing a very genuine danger of spitting out flawed results that would completely fall apart during a brutal cross-examination. Right now, there simply isn't a certified computer program capable of untangling these dense mixtures smoothly enough for crime labs to use and judges to legally approve. Programmers are desperately trying to build that exact digital tool right now. But its absence explains exactly why these swabs have sat uselessly for 66 days. Stop blaming overflowing desks, absent technicians, or petty turf wars over who gets to hold the evidence. The actual scientific technology required to rip a clean identity from this specific biological mess just doesn't exist in a functional state anywhere on Earth. The most brilliant public explanation for this deadlock actually came directly from the lead ancestral tracker running point over at Parabon Nanolabs. That Virginia-based facility has successfully cracked over 300 frozen mysteries using advanced familial tracing, and their head researcher has pioneered this cutting-edge discipline practically from day one. She was hunting killers with this tech way before local cops even knew it was possible, inventing the very rules everyone uses today to close files the old guard abandoned. So when she weighs in on this current biological puzzle, she isn't just tossing out random armchair theories. She is diagnosing an entire scientific ecosystem she personally helped construct. The moment word dropped this past February about an unknown genetic profile, she hit the airwaves, instantly jumping straight onto Brian Anton's broadcast over at News Nation. On air, she openly confessed to praying for that exact scenario, desperately hoping detectives would find an intruder's biological trace somewhere inside that house. She made it crystal clear that discovering biological material, entirely disconnected from Nancy's social orbit, was the ultimate golden ticket, openly stating that if they truly possessed this bizarre outsider material, it would absolutely guarantee an answer, even if everything else failed miserably. Uncovering an untraceable genetic signature completely detached from the victim's inner circle might just be the silver bullet needed here, and she wasn't softening her words whatsoever. You are hearing absolute certainty from an expert who has seen this exact technology unmask phantoms that traditional police work couldn't catch after 10, 20, or even 40 years. There was zero exaggeration in her tone. Only clinical accuracy, which she proved the next day on Elizabeth Vargas's show by mapping out the exact hidden strategies detectives were likely executing. She figured they were running dual tracks hitting the federal database while actively exploring family trees at the very same time, refusing to wait around for Plan A to bomb out. Shipping those vital swabs directly to private technicians was a totally bulletproof, tactical maneuver in her view. The logic made perfect sense that specific private facility actually owns the advanced machinery required for high-density sequencing, whereas federal agents surprisingly lack that internal firepower. In her view, bypassing the feds for that specialized lab was a brilliant call since the private sector holds the exact high-res scanning equipment vital for ancestral mapping that the federal lab lacks entirely. Federal authorities constantly outsource this stuff anyway, as every single law enforcement group nationwide looking to do familial tracking is forced to rely on external vendors, and the Federal Bureau is absolutely no exception here. Bypassing the middleman to use a clinic that runs both standard and advanced testing at once clearly aimed to cut down on transit delays, especially since the ticking clock is their most dangerous enemy right now. Beyond the mere logistics, she confidently pitched a hyper-specific theory regarding the physical residue left behind. Speaking directly with People magazine, she theorized the residue was likely spit, drawing attention to that eerie porch camera video where the intruder was clearly clenching a tactical flashlight between his teeth. As the masked figure leaned into the lens, she explained he easily could have drooled onto his own gloved hands before smearing that fluid across door handles and countertops all throughout the property. Spit provides rich cellular material, but its presence utterly changes how we must view this tangled mess. You've got the intruder's oral fluid slathered right over top of the house's natural background biology, irreversibly mingling with Nancy's personal cellular trace from years of daily living. Stacking an anonymous killer's bodily fluids on top of the mundane microscopic debris of an active household creates exactly the kind of chaotic biological soup that completely defies digital unraveling. Back in late winter, her confidence soared. They possessed foreign material and a clear tracing roadmap. This exact methodology had successfully caught hundreds of ghosts before, but she recently provided crucial background on why her initial upbeat perspective ultimately shifted toward deep concern. Hearing that the swabs from Nancy's house contained multiple profiles didn't actually set off alarm bells for her at first, primarily because intertwined data can sometimes work in your favor. Finding overlapping markers often proves that the cellular material originated from a fierce, physical struggle right there in the room, rather than just floating in as random environmental dust. When you stumble across several unidentifiable profiles mashed together, it frequently skyrockets the odds that one of those hidden signatures absolutely belongs to your primary suspect. That was her baseline theory initially, yet as agonizing months dragged on without any hits, the brutal silence essentially proved the biological knot was infinitely worse than anyone originally feared. If a world-class facility packing the most expensive diagnostic gear on Earth still can't isolate a clean read after all these months, you aren't dealing with a standard puzzle anymore. You are staring down a historically difficult nightmare, and in the realm of high-density genetic sequencing, this level of chaos simply breaks every single algorithm we currently possess. As spring rolled around without a single ping from the technicians, and with Nanos admitting it could take 12 solid months, she delivered the most brutally honest public breakdown of the entire probe. Taking the mic alongside Natasha Ziyovs on that News Nation broadcast, she subsequently laid out the most breathtakingly clear justification we've ever heard regarding why these vital clues remain hopelessly trapped. Zuz pushed hard on that staggering 12-month police estimate. Could that really be accurate? And what exactly does a delay like that reveal regarding our actual forensic materials? She skipped the sugarcoating entirely. Anytime a testing facility hands down a 12-month wait, it sends a clear message that their current bioinformatics programs and digital software simply cannot untangle that specific biological blend. Basically, my read on the situation is they totally lack the tools to isolate the samples today, leaving them praying for an upcoming technological breakthrough. These researchers aren't just slacking off. They are literally waiting for modern science to catch up. She pointed out that stance makes total sense, since standard genetic profiling took 30 years to reach the reliable standard that modern forensic teams use every single day. Zuve pushed back. Did she mean the required technology simply hasn't been invented? She agreed, noting neither the federal authorities nor private facilities possess it right now. She also emphasized exactly how the perpetrator ought to be feeling right now. If she were standing in his shoes, fully aware of whatever altercation went down inside that residence, and knowing she had physically touched items there, she would be sweating bullets, since this advancing technology will inevitably trap him. The sole unknown factor is simply when that specific proof will answer our initial opening question. Shipping those clues off to an independent Florida facility instead of utilizing federal crime labs quickly turned into this probe's most fiercely debated controversy. Ex-Puma County Sheriff Richard Carmona, the former United States Surgeon General, went on Brian Anton's News Nation broadcast toward the end of March and didn't mince words. He claimed Nanos single-handedly reopened the property, an authority exclusively reserved for the primary investigator, only after every single clue gets thoroughly pictured, packaged, and properly cataloged. He stressed that top brass never handles that. Furthermore, he wondered why anyone would hire an outside company when federal bureaus provide forensic support to municipal departments completely free. Those harsh words arrived alongside immense internal backlash. By late March, the local deputies union, representing the department's active officers, passed a united resolution declaring zero confidence in Nanos. The regional county supervisors demanded he testify under penalty of perjury regarding his leadership throughout the entire inquiry. Meanwhile, Nanos insisted he fully supports his squad and harbors zero remorse. However, one particular slice of that outrage completely falls apart against scientific facts. The Federal Bureau simply lacks the internal laboratory infrastructure for advanced single nucleotide polymorphism sequencing. That remains an operational reality of the industry's evolution rather than some slight against federal agents. Every single precinct, nationwide, attempting forensic family tracing ships their samples off to specialized external contractors. That includes absolutely everyone, even the top federal investigators themselves. Passing those items through federal hands first before ultimately redirecting them to an independent testing facility would merely create another vulnerable transfer point rather than streamlining the process. Mailing everything straight to that Florida facility, an establishment fully capable of handling dual genetic assessments at once, ultimately represented the quickest path according to family tracing experts. Yet no mailing strategy could magically alter the fundamental biology. The digital programs required to untangle convoluted genetic soups simply haven't been invented by any institution anywhere. February's shipping choices had absolutely zero impact on software development. The coding simply isn't there yet. Handing everything to the feds from the jump would have yielded the exact same stalemate. Federal authorities aren't hindered by red tape, but rather the bleeding edge of an 8-year-old discipline and a highly specific puzzle that modern technology hasn't managed to solve quite yet. Another massive hurdle lurks behind that mixture separation issue, generating far less media buzz, yet it remains equally crucial for comprehending what must perfectly align once the technology finally evolves. Imagine the separation roadblock vanishes tomorrow. An immaculate, workable genetic blueprint gets pulled from the mess and delivered to a family historian. Detectives still wouldn't have a suspect's identity. They only possess a jumping-off point, and uncovering that identity relies completely on whose information lives inside the specific heritage networks that cops are lawfully permitted to scour. Forensic family tracing operates by inputting a perpetrator's genetic map and hunting for bloodkin. The algorithm specifically targets individuals sharing biological markers with your mystery person. Genetic sequences aligning strongly enough to suggest shared bloodlines. These fragmented hits might reveal second, third, or even fifth cousins, essentially anyone linked through a shared forebear from decades ago. Using those ties, specialized researchers construct a backwards pedigree chart. They track bloodlines while referencing government files, mortality logs, historical populations, wedding registries, and funeral notices. They prune limbs off the tree using birth years, locations, and traits until the remaining lines merge onto a tiny suspect pool. That exact method ultimately caught the Golden State Killer. Detectives dumped their physical evidence into the GED match system. A fragmented hit popped up. It wasn't immediate family, but a remote relative holding a tiny, yet mathematically crucial chunk of shared biology with the phantom attacker. Starting with that estranged relative heritage, experts mapped the bloodline in reverse, charting the history and pinpointing shared forefathers, before aggressively tracking downward through every single descendant of those forebears until the final cluster of potential perpetrators shrank. Classic shoe leather detective work subsequently ruled out the rest until one guy was left standing. D'Angelo wasn't in the federal database. He lacked any criminal history. They snagged him simply because a perfectly law-abiding relative submitted their spit to an open-source platform that police were legally permitted to comb through. This exact playbook has cracked hundreds of mysteries, yet it strictly functions within the boundaries of legally accessible platforms. The most massive commercial heritage networks globally remain totally off-limits to cops. Ancestry DNA alone guards upwards of 25 million private user profiles. 23andMe maintained tens of millions before going under. MyHeritage protects millions more on top of that. Absolutely zero of those services allow police access unless the individual user explicitly agrees. Strict corporate privacy rules ban it entirely. The only digital networks that detectives get the green light to scan are GED Match and Family Tree DNA. Both sites empower their members to deliberately check a box allowing police matching. Combined, they contain a mere sliver of the broader corporate archives. Yet that tiny sliver provided enough ammunition to unmask the Golden State Killer construct, the pedigree leading straight to Bryan Kohberger, and to crack hundreds of violent mysteries that would have otherwise stayed frozen permanently. The massive wildcard dictating how fast a hit drops after securing a usable sequence is ethnic heritage. Make no mistake, that's not some trivial detail. That lone element stands as the deciding force between solving a case in 48 hours versus dragging out for months, assuming that initial separation hurdle gets cleared. Grasping this single factor changes everything about where this manhunt heads next. Folks tracing their family tree back generations in America, especially those with Northwestern European bloodlines, usually have distant kin lurking inside these voluntary registries. Deeply established American bloodlines naturally spawn a massive network of extended relatives. A huge chunk of these family members submit genetic swabs, legally exposing their profiles to police networks. That translates directly into lightning-fast connections, rapid lineage mapping, and immediate suspect unmasking. The lead genetic sleuth on this file stated bluntly how this impacts perpetrators carrying this specific heritage. Hand them a clean sample and authorities might pinpoint a killer's identity before the day even ends. However, if the phantom has recent immigrant roots, particularly a Latin American background, finding hits inside these voluntary archives becomes brutally tough, dragging the timeline out for several agonizing months. Sometimes the wait stretches for years, though the lead expert insists the technology eventually cracks these cold files. Detectives just need extra patience digging through countless records until that one crucial relative finally pops up. Authorities keep the killer's exact heritage under strict wraps, yet armchair detectives currently hold incredible power to break this case wide open. Folks holding biological results from Ancestry23 and Me or My Heritage without porting those files over to police-accessible archives are actively sitting on a massive operational goldmine. One distant cousin sharing their code this very moment could instantly expose the exact monster who kidnapped Nancy Guthrie, but detectives remain completely blind if your data stays locked away in unreachable corporate vaults. This leading expert also aimed a highly specific tactical suggestion directly at the investigative team. Swab the entire residence again. Just because the primary sweep failed absolutely does not mean the killer left zero biological traces. Crime scene techs likely ignored loose, naturally fallen strands of hair while rushing through their initial walkthrough. Even broken dead follicles occasionally hold enough cellular material to sketch a perfect suspect blueprint. Areas ignored during the initial chaos might suddenly become prime targets for a secondary biological sweep. Armed with significantly updated theories regarding the attacker's precise path through those bloody rooms, the absolute strongest tactical play available completely bypasses that messy mixed DNA issue and ignores the Florida lab entirely, a critical point the expert stressed heavily. She firmly believes a secondary or even tertiary dump site exists, and her scientific reasoning remains bulletproof. The victim vanished, but former federal agent Maureen O'Connell studied those crimson stains on the steps to deliver a chilling theory. Her scrutinized the splatter physics, noting the absolute lack of shoe impressions left behind in the pooling liquid. Her breakdown suggested the victim was physically hoisted away, with her head slumped backward, bleeding passively toward the ground since she lacked consciousness, which practically guarantees a getaway car factored heavily into this nightmare. That mysterious getaway automobile automatically becomes ground zero. Whatever hidden dungeon or isolated property she ultimately ended up inside holds equal evidentiary value. Both individuals occupied those confined spaces together, shedding cellular debris constantly, as the expert bluntly noted that human beings constantly leave microscopic traces. She explained that the captive dropped organic markers at every stop, while her abductor inevitably did the exact same thing once he ditched his protective gloves. Flaking bare skin across isolated rooms where he felt safe enough to unmask completely alters the investigation because finding just one pure biological sample away from the initial house flips the script entirely. One pristine genetic signature skips the messy separation phase, completely avoiding the desperate need for futuristic coding, allowing immediate integration into ancestry servers. Forget untangling overlapping bodily fluids or waiting several agonizing seasons because authorities already possess the digital machinery to process a pure hit instantly. Speaking straight to News Nation, she promised that snagging just one solid biological blueprint off the abductor guarantees his eventual unmasking via family tree tracking. She firmly expects a breakthrough like this to materialize soon, pointing straight at the Bryan Kohberger manhunt as the ultimate proof. Detectives never caught him using flawless bedroom samples. They nailed him using isolated sweat left on a discarded weapon sheath, representing one pure deposit on a solitary object. Slugging that pristine cellular marker into the national database triggered a lightning-fast match, leaving critics utterly stunned after watching the high-profile investigation completely stall for over a month. A single upload rapidly mapped out the relatives and spat out a prime suspect, while simultaneously outlining the exact verification protocol authorities must utilize moving forward. Instead of slapping cuffs on him, the second his lineage matched federal agents hung back and quietly tracked his every move. Shadowing him day and night allowed cops to secretly snag a tossed piece of garbage, securing a fresh biological swab to test directly against the bloody bedroom evidence. Hitting a perfect match on that secondary test provided both digital and physical certainty, establishing the golden standard for modern policing. Snag a relative's alias, verify it with a stealthy garbage pull, and finally kick the door in. It requires supreme patience. However, once the ancestral link clicks into place, suspects usually find themselves behind bars within a few short weeks. Bypassing the incredibly tangled mixture issue immediately unlocks this exact rapid-fire timeline, and local authorities already possess the technological framework required to flawlessly execute it. Cops have held these tools since day one, desperately waiting for pristine evidence, though experts refuse to completely write off the Southern lab just yet. Speaking with incredibly deep insider knowledge regarding microscopic advancements, she practically promised the public that researchers are nowhere near hitting a scientific wall. Brilliant minds aggressively push these digital boundaries every single day, achieving staggering technological breakthroughs over the past few seasons alone. The race is on top. Brilliant minds in crime labs and universities are battling to unlock clear genetic blueprints from tangled multi-person DNA webs. Experts grasp the massive impact this breakthrough will have on detective work, pushing forward with intense funding and desperate focus that simply didn't exist 2 years back. This technological blind spot finally commands serious respect and dedicated task forces. The specialists tackling this puzzle realize that cracking this code won't just solve this single mystery, but will blast wide open hundreds of cold files nationwide. She compared this journey to the early days of traditional DNA profiling. Those complex mapping systems weren't born in a single day, instead evolving through decades of relentless testing legal battles and mounting trial evidence. Various computer programs were forged, heavily scrutinized, and polished for 30 years before finally becoming the gold standard in every vital forensics facility. This new sequencing technique is just stepping onto that exact same path. Though drastically compressed and accelerating through intense global teamwork and massive upgrades in processing power, and incredibly high-stakes crimes creating a desperate demand that older methods never experienced during their infancy. She emphasized that predicting massive technological leaps within the coming months is entirely realistic. There isn't an exact deadline, nor a promised miracle. This comes from the seasoned perspective of an expert who has repeatedly seen raw motivation transform into real-world breakthroughs whenever the heat gets turned up enough. Right now, the blazing spotlight on this exact hurdle is absolutely unprecedented. Massive media mysteries have always turbocharged investigative technologies in completely unforeseeable ways that become glaringly obvious looking back. The infamous California serial killer takedown forced police departments everywhere to embrace family tree forensics overnight, blowing past what scholars had spent years begging them to do. The brutal college slayings pushed authorities to use these tools on active manhunts instead of just cold files. With its incredibly famous technological roadblock making global headlines, this specific manhunt could easily launch new sequencing algorithms into the stratosphere, rescuing countless other dead-end investigations trapped behind identical barriers. Innovators tackling entirely different scientific puzzles can sense the gravity of this case. University data specialists obsessed with separating blended samples feel the heavy spotlight. That intense scrutiny practically always guarantees massive breakthroughs. The absolute second the technology arrives, everything changes. A pristine genetic signature, whether pulled from the chaotic Florida evidence in alternate location or fresh swabbing lands on an ancestral detective's desk. They dump the file into massive commercial ancestry databases. The system immediately hunts through millions of public users, desperately scanning for overlapping chromosomal fragments that scream out a hidden blood tie. Should anyone related to the killer be lurking in those servers? Maybe a distant cousin who casually submitted a spit tube years ago, the system throws a bright red flag. That tiny fraction of identical genetic code forms the foundation. Working backwards from that single anchor, the researcher constructs a sprawling ancestral web by hunting down open source documents, hospital registries, historical headcounts, wedding licenses, and newspaper tributes charting the bloodline straight from that random relative all the way up to the great-grandparent they share with the unseen killer. From that historical patriarch, the hunt shifts forward, mapping out every single descending branch that might possibly have bred the monster who left their sweat at the scene. Analysts narrow down by age. They filter by location. They ruthlessly cut based on physical descriptions. Every remaining name gets violently checked against the detective's master file, comparing statures, muscle mass, and the unique swagger the Phantom showed on camera, alongside his tactical gear and the calculated decisions executed under darkness. The massive suspect pool utterly implodes, shrinking from hundreds to dozens to a mere handful, and finally resting on one absolute identity. Armed with that crucial identity, law enforcement kicks off the final hunt, initiating covert surveillance and securing hard biological proof, waiting for a tossed coffee cup to pit the suspect's fresh saliva against the digital ghost pulled from the database. Once those two signatures lock together, the handcuffs come out. This specialized ancestry tracker has loudly declared in several press interviews that tracking someone with generations of American history and predominantly white Western European heritage makes a hit incredibly likely, as that specific demographic heavily dominates these commercial public servers the very moment a clean sample gets loaded. Ripping the mask off a killer through ancestral mapping can literally take a few minutes or hours, and that isn't just some rare lottery win. As she considers it standard procedure, having witnessed it crack countless ancient files before the analyst could even sketch out the first few branches of the target's relatives. The brutal truth hiding behind 66 agonizing days of silence is perfectly clear. The biological evidence is safe. The ancestral tracking web is armed. The task force is coiled. The servers are packed. Every single weapon needed to destroy this phantom's anonymity is fully primed, save for one missing puzzle piece. They desperately need a flawless genetic signature from a stubborn biological soup that refuses to yield simply because the required computer program hasn't hit the market yet. An elite analyst who conquered over 300 mysteries using this method publicly promised that the second this software drops, hunting down the suspect will be blindingly fast. Assuming the killer's family tree stretches far back locally and some distant cousin spat into a tube, the dark truth will violently explode into the light the minute the computers activate. Biology isn't the sole weapon detectives are wielding right now. During a televised sit-down this past March, Nanos revealed that agents are heavily scrutinizing a sudden Wi-Fi blackout, a highly suspicious power glitch that seemingly hit the neighborhood exactly as the predator was snatching the victim from her life. He explained that when detectives reviewed the digital timeline, they uncovered a chilling dead zone where all connections mysteriously vanished. He stressed they are hunting down this lead ruthlessly. Should this blackout turn out to be calculated sabotage, the horrifying implications change the entire game. It means the monster stalked up to the house already knowing exactly what security systems guarded the perimeter, fully prepared to blind them before crossing the threshold. This absolutely isn't the frantic sloppiness of a crime of passion. This was a cold, heavily rehearsed military-style raid. In a different breath, the commander openly admitted his team thinks the nightmare was a highly specific hit. They are confident they understand exactly what drove the monster to her doorstep. He stubbornly refused to elaborate further, guarding the exact details and dodging any ironclad promises. Yet simply admitting this wasn't a wrong place, wrong time tragedy shrinks the suspect list from millions down to a ghost with a highly specific burning motive. Identifying an attacker who held hidden knowledge about her life or the dark prizes her exploitation would unlock. Deep-rooted motives always bleed evidence, and combining those breadcrumbs with an inevitable genetic bombshell will mercilessly trap the hunter. Bitcoin ransom demands flooded newsrooms almost immediately after she vanished. Yet detectives still refuse to verify if any of these digital extortion messages are actually real. During a March broadcast, Savannah Guthrie admitted several messages were obvious hoaxes, though she and her siblings actually replied to two they considered genuine a conflict authorities remained completely silent about. Detectives have quietly spent months piecing together an exact electronic timeline of those critical hours. They are tracking security cameras, plotting cellular pings to map out exact midnight travel routes, and recovering a trail of electronic footprints someone desperately tried and failed to completely wipe away. This cyber trail won't instantly name a suspect, yet it clears innocent people and drastically shrinks the search grid, locking individuals down to precise locations at exact times. Once detectives combine this timeline with genetic testing, wild theories will suddenly transform into undeniable facts. Fast forward to April 6, day 65, when Savannah finally took back her seat on the morning broadcast sporting bright yellow alongside her co-anchor who wore a matching colored tie. Supporters gathered outside clutching golden ribbons and handmade posters that prominently displayed the powerful words, "Decide and act." That specific wisdom comes straight from advice her mom offered after her father passed away, urging her to simply figure out a plan and execute it without any hesitation. The emotional anchor struggled against crying while thanking the crowd outside, never admitting her mother was dead, and confirming the $1 million family bounty plus the $100,000 federal prize remain available. Local authorities have openly promised this massive manhunt will not stop until they finally bring Nancy home, or absolutely run out of stones to turn over. Tell me your thoughts before leaving. Will the crucial clue emerge from that southern testing facility, a totally separate location, or fresh forensic sweeps of the primary house? Leave your predictions down below, since our loyal viewers have successfully predicted these twists before. The debates happening down below are always fascinating. So if this deep dive offered fresh insights, hit like and pass it around to ensure our next major update reaches a much wider audience. In a world filled with uncertainty, one powerful lesson rises from this story: truth often hides in silence, but persistence gives it a voice. The investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance reminds us that justice is rarely immediate. Clues can mislead, evidence can confuse, and even experts can face dead ends. Yet what truly matters is the refusal to give up. Behind every mystery is a human life, a family waiting, and a community hoping. It's easy to feel frustrated when answers don't come quickly, but this is where integrity and patience become essential. The people who continue searching, investigators, analysts, and advocates, show us the value of dedication even when progress seems invisible. This story also teaches us to think critically. Not every clue is what it seems, and jumping to conclusions can harm innocent people. Truth requires careful attention, humility, and the courage to admit when we are wrong. Ultimately, the lesson is simple but powerful. Never stop seeking truth, even when the path is unclear. Because every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer, not just to answers, but to justice, compassion, and understanding.